To the third in the series of presentations on the Urban Competency Framework, which was developed by RedR UK with funding provided to the International Rescue Committee from ECHO as part of a wider project for the Global Alliance for Urban Crises, entitled Developing the Skills to Meet the Needs of Urban Populations in Crises through the Alliance of Urban Responders. This presentation explores using the Urban Competency Framework alongside other resources. The presentation covers three main areas: the main content of the Urban Competency Framework, how the humanitarian competencies that are included in the framework relate to the core Humanitarian Competency Framework, the CHCF, and how the framework can be used alongside other competency frameworks. An explanation of what the CHCF is will also be given during the course of the presentation. We'll start by looking at the competencies that are needed in an urban crisis. The information in this section of the presentation provides a brief recap of information provided in the second presentation. Those working in urban crises require a broad range of competencies which can be categorised into four different types: urban contextual competencies, humanitarian competencies, and role-specific competencies that are functional and technical. The UCF includes the core competencies that are appropriate for all the urban context and are relevant to all of those working in urban crises. Role-specific competencies are not included in the UCF. As the Urban Competency Framework is designed for all of those working in urban crises, contextual competencies, shown in the diagram here in green, and humanitarian competencies, shown in the diagram in pink, are included. These are the core competencies for the urban context. The functional and technical competencies, shown here in blue, are not shared by all, but are related to the specific role function or technical specialism of a post. They are not included in the framework. Technical and functional competencies are not included, but they are still important, and all roles need a mix of these competencies that are relevant to the role. When defining the roles, responsibilities and requirements of a job, for example, when creating a job description for a role, or when discussing the requirements of a job with an employee or volunteer, it's useful to be clear about the full range of competency types that are required. To define these requirements, the urban contextual and humanitarian competencies can be drawn from the Urban Competency Framework, and the other functional and technical competencies can be drawn from other sources. Other sources might include other competency frameworks that exist and that have been created by a specific organisation for their own use. For example, the UK Department for International Development, UNICEF, and so on. Or they might have been developed for use more broadly, such as the Competency Framework for Child Protection in Emergencies that has been created by the Child Protection Working Group. Competencies can also be drawn from professional bodies and institutes from the country of origin or from the country of operation. An example of this is the UK-based Institute of Civil Engineers members' attributes. When competency frameworks don't exist, useful information can sometimes be drawn from learning curricula. For example, the PMD Pro Project Management for Development Professionals Project Management Qualification is based on a syllabus that outlines all of the knowledge and skills that are involved in project management. These can be developed into competencies, or an organisation could request a staff member to gain the qualification to demonstrate their project management abilities. A useful resource on how to use a competency framework alongside other frameworks or HR resources is the Core Humanitarian Standards Alliance's Guide to Integrating the Core Humanitarian Competency Framework and Other Competency Frameworks, which can be found on the CHSA website. Although this focuses on the CHSA's Core Humanitarian Competency Framework, much of the information is relevant when working with other competency frameworks. If you're combining competencies from more than one source, it's a good idea to simplify and standardise the information that you provide to post holders. You can do this by removing any duplicated competencies or merging any that are similar, by prioritising only the most important competencies so that the list of requirements is a manageable size, or by standardising the language and format so that the same terms are used to avoid confusion. In the next part of the presentation, we will look at the humanitarian competencies in the Urban Competency Framework, how they were defined and where they were drawn from. The 4 competency domains in the Urban Competency Framework that are humanitarian are drawn from the Core Humanitarian Competency Framework. The Core Humanitarian Competency Framework, or CHCF, was developed by the Consortium of British Humanitarian Agencies, CBHA, which has now become the START network. This competency framework is available for use by all and is now maintained by the Core Humanitarian Standards Alliance, who have taken on the main responsibility for promoting and updating the framework. The CHCF defines the core humanitarian competencies that are required in emergency settings. Although there are other frameworks that define humanitarian competencies, the CHCF is commonly used by NGOs around the world. The humanitarian competencies drawn from the CHCF and incorporated into the Urban Competency Framework have been adapted for the urban context. They are designed to cover all the key humanitarian competencies that are required, and so the Urban Competency Framework can be used as a standalone document. If an organisation has already developed resources around the CHCF, the 2 competency frameworks can be used in combination. The CHCF is relevant to all of those engaged in humanitarian action in all contexts, whether urban or rural. There are 6 competency domains broken down into competencies and behaviours, which are provided at 2 levels: behaviours for all and behaviours for managers. All of the competency domains and competencies in the CHCF have been incorporated into the Urban Competency Framework, although some have been merged or altered slightly. The behaviours have been altered, with new behaviours added to ensure that the competencies are directly relevant to urban contexts. This table shows where each of the CHCF competencies has been incorporated into the Urban Competency Framework. This table can be found in the user guide. An example of how they've been incorporated is the competency applying humanitarian standards and principles, which is the second competency under the first domain. This has been included in the Urban Competency Framework, and although the behaviours are described differently, it is very similar. The competency working accountably, which is the third competency in the second domain of the CHCF, has been rephrased to draw out the contextual relevance and appears in the Urban Competency Framework as demonstrating accountability to multiple diverse stakeholders. An example where there has been greater change in the competency working with others, which is the second competency in the third domain of the CHCF. This has been integrated across the Urban Competency Framework. You will see in the table here this is recorded as mainstreamed throughout. This competency is a fundamental approach to effectively working in urban crises, and so it influences all of the competencies that are included in the Urban Competency Framework. In the final part of this presentation, we'll look at how the Urban Competency Framework can be applied to individual roles. All roles in urban crises require a mix of competency types, including contextual, humanitarian, technical and functional competencies, which are all underpinned by sets of underlying knowledge, skills and attitudes. When defining what is required in a role, an organisation can draw the contextual and humanitarian competencies from the Urban Competency Framework and technical and functional competencies from other sources relevant to the role. Including these in a job description can ensure that the employee or volunteer is clear about what is required of them. It can help them to monitor their performance and can be used to hold them to account. There is no standard format for job descriptions, but some organisations also include some knowledge, skills and attitudes in addition to the competencies that are required. This can be done explicitly by listing them. Sometimes it's done by including other requirements, such as a specific qualification that would be an indicator of a specific knowledge or skill set. A Nutrition in Emergencies project manager role for a child-focused charity can be used as an example of how this mix of requirements, of types of competencies and knowledge, skills and attitudes might work. In this case, if the post holder is working in an urban crisis for an international NGO that focuses on children, they might need competencies drawn from the UCF, nutrition competencies drawn from a relevant source such as the Nutrition in Emergencies framework, and a set of functional competencies related to the project management aspects of their role. In addition, they will need knowledge, skills, and attitude sets. They may need to know about methods for testing chronic and acute malnutrition. They may need to be able to use a MUAC band to measure the arm circumference of children and babies, and they might need attitudes that will enable them to work effectively with small children. This mix of requirements is different depending on the role. For example, a wash engineer on deployment to a water company in a crisis-affected urban area will require the same urban contextual and humanitarian competencies as the nutrition project manager. But in addition, they will need water supply and sanitation engineering, hydraulic engineering or civil engineering competencies, and functional competencies that might include needs assessment, capacity building, and perhaps project management. In addition, they will also require specific knowledge, for example, methods of testing water quality skills. For example, the ability to use water testing equipment accurately, and attitudes, for example, a willingness to continue to learn and the humility to listen to others. These additional competencies in areas of knowledge, skills, and attitudes can be drawn from other relevant sources and used to complement what is included in the Urban Competency Framework. More information about how to use the Urban Competency Framework alongside other competency frameworks and HR resources can be found in the Urban Competency Framework User Guide. Thank you for listening to this presentation.